Chinese President Xi Jinping has wrapped up a two-day visit to North Korea. Capping the summit with dictator Kim Jong Un, Xi said that Beijing's friendship with Pyongyang remains a top priority and that the two countries, quote, share a common destiny. Analysts say the summit was an attempt by China to reassert its influence over its neighbor as North Korea has grown ever closer to Russia in recent years. Jenny Shin has the story.
Cheering crowds, waving flowers and flags. It's a lavish send-off for Xi Jinping. The Chinese president has wrapped up his first visit to North Korea in 7 years, after 2 days of bilateral meetings with Kim Jong Un. Among the topics discussed, expanding cooperation across trade, agriculture and technology. But perhaps the most sensitive regional security issue was absent from the agenda, the North's steadfast pursuit of nuclear weapons.
Neither the communique nor the many state media reports about the visit made any mention of North Korea's nuclear weapons. That was important to Kim Jong Un because he wants his country to be recognized as a nuclear weapons state. China's position hasn't changed on that, but by not mentioning it, it perhaps opened the door a little bit wider to that happening in the future.
As North Korea's most important economic partner, China has routinely called for the country's nuclear disarmament in return for much-needed aid and political recognition. But the disarmament talks fell apart in 2019, and Pyongyang has since tested an array of ballistic missiles. It's one of the few areas where Beijing aligns with Washington, as it advocates a denuclearized Korean peninsula for regional stability, and the collapse of Pyongyang could send millions streaming across the border. Aside from reaffirming bilateral ties, experts say the visit goes beyond improving relations. Beijing is hoping to keep the Hermit Kingdom in its orbit, amid the country's rapprochement with Moscow during its full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
And for more on this story, I'm joined by Dr. Edward Howell, a lecturer in international relations at the University of Oxford. Thanks so much for being with us here on France 24. I want to start off with just a general question here. Was this visit a success for China or for North Korea or for both countries? How do you evaluate the outcome?
Thank you very much. Well, firstly, it was a success for Kim Jong Un because no mention of North Korea's nuclear program or of the denuclearization of North Korea took place. And whilst this was arguably expected, it shows that China, just akin to Russia, is silently accepting North Korea's status as a nuclear weapon state. And this is what Kim Jong Un ultimately wants. For Kim Jong Un, this was a success because Kim Jong Un has been trying to benefit from his relations with both China and Russia and diversifying his ties beyond China, but also keeping China on side. I think on the part of Xi Jinping, she wants to make sure that North Korea does not do anything that goes against China's interests. And China's ultimate interest on the Korean Peninsula is the stability of the Korean Peninsula and of its border with North Korea.
Now, this visit is a reminder of the defense pact that China and North Korea have had for 65 years, essentially guaranteeing mutual support if either is attacked. What message did this summit between Xi and Kim Jong Un send to the rest of the world, do you think?
I think it made very clear that on the part of China and North Korea are still good friends, but their relationship over the past or since 1949, when diplomatic relations were established, their relations have been bumpy. Xi Jinping mentioned the economy when in the readout from China, and you can see that he perhaps wants economic ties with North Korea to continue to strengthen. And ultimately, in terms of economic development, China would want North Korea to open up its economy in the way China has done. But North Korea is obviously refusing to do so, and Kim Jong Un in particular has refused to do so. So I think there's a little bit of Chinese frustration on that part. But at the same time, China continues to help North Korea evade sanctions. China's continued to supply dual-use technologies to Russia vis-a-vis the Kremlin's war against Ukraine. So I don't think China is too irritated or angry, to be precise, about North Korea and North Korea's ties with Russia, even though it might be a little uncomfortable.
You mentioned North Korea's nuclear program, which did not come up at this summit. It's, of course, a great source of great concern for many across the globe. Is this a signal that North Korea is here to stay as a nuclear power?
I see no reason why North Korea is going to give up its nuclear weapons. Kim Jong Un has reiterated that North Korea as a nuclear armed state is a permanent feature. He's been seen even between the announcement of Xi Jinping's visit and when Xi Jinping arrived on Monday. North Korean state media showed Kim Jong Un visiting factories, highlighting how North Korea's nuclear program, its uranium and plutonium enrichment, would only expand. And I think the nuclear North Korea is here to stay.
You also mentioned Russia. You know, Russia was looming large over this summit. There's been a growing alliance between North Korea and Moscow. North Korea has even sent weapons and troops to Ukraine. Do you think that Xi made any headway with Pyongyang at this summit where Russia is concerned? And what would be Xi's goal in that regard?
Well, we've got to remember that in 1953, when the Korean War ended not with a peace treaty but a ceasefire and an armistice agreement, China was one of the signatories to that agreement. So China has always wanted to retain influence over the Korean peninsula. And China's always wanted to make sure that it isn't fully divorced from what's happening in North Korea. I presume if this were mentioned, if the Ukraine war were mentioned, we do not know. Okay, this was not mentioned on by either side. China would have made clear that China would not support North Korea abandoning Beijing. But I don't think Pyongyang would do that anyway. At the moment, North Korea has now got a renewed alliance with Russia. It is an alliance. Both Russia and North Korea call it an alliance. But North Korea also knows that it has a treaty with China. The only other country with whom China has a treaty. And I think on the part of Pyongyang, Pyongyang is trying to hedge and gain benefits from both Beijing and Moscow. And I think Kim Jong Un has been much more successful doing so than his grandfather, Kim Il-sung, tried to do during the Cold War.
You know, I think back to 2019 when Donald Trump became the first sitting U.S. president to step foot in North Korea and to shake hands with Kim Jong Un. That was followed by a growing friendship with Vladimir Putin, and now we see Xi Jinping courting him in this way. Am I right to think that Kim Jong Un has become more legitimized on the world stage in the last 6 or 7 years?
Well, we only have to go back to the 3rd of September last year when Xi Jinping invited Putin and Kim Jong Un to the Victory Day parade in Beijing, and Kim Jong Un stood next to Xi Jinping and Putin as if equals, and that's a key act and a key signal and symbol of legitimation here. Of course, Kim Jong Un values the status of any meetings with, say, President Trump, although I'm not sure as to whether Kim would meet President Trump now. He might do, and offer no concessions and try and get some kind of tacit recognition from Trump as a nuclear state. But on the other hand, he doesn't need to, because at the moment, Kim Jong Un is getting everything he wants: humanitarian assistance, status, missile and military technology from Russia.
Well, let's talk about Donald Trump, the Donald Trump factor, given how unpredictable he can be on the world stage. Do you think the message that Xi Jinping was sending by having this summit was that any future U.S. action with regard to North Korea would or should be mediated by Beijing?
I think perhaps mediating is quite a strong word to use here. Mm-hmm. I think China is trying to make sure that it is not marginalized in any US-North Korea discussions. China wants to make sure that anything that might, and I use the word might here because the possibility at the moment is quite low, happen between Trump and Kim Jong Un does not disregard Beijing's interests.
Now, in response to the North Korean threat, South Korea, Japan, and the U.S. have been deepening their security ties. Does a warmer relationship between China and North Korea strengthen, or does it complicate that trilateral alliance, you think?
Well, it should force the US, South Korea, and Japan to strengthen their relationship. We know that South Korea has strong economic ties with China, but the security relationship and coordination, particularly between South Korea and Japan, needs to become much stronger. We know Seoul and Tokyo have had a difficult relationship owing to the legacies of history, but now is the time to overcome them. And particularly with the US, really strengthen bilateral and trilateral security coordination. Because the key thing that's happening in East Asia at the moment is that it's not just individual states increasing their nuclear arsenal, North Korea, yes, but also China too. It's countries such as North Korea, China and Russia, the three of them are working together. Even if they have different interests, they are working together collectively to undermine the US, to undermine the US's alliances, and to undermine the US-led international order. And that's something that, particularly for Washington's allies in East Asia, Seoul and Tokyo, they need to pay close attention to.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Dr. Edward Howell, lecturer in international relations at the University of Oxford. Thanks so much for joining us here on France 24 and sharing with us your perspective.